Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLMs, that's anti-multi-level marketing, life, and some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, I am bringing you a true crime video. Yes, it has been a hot second since I have uploaded a true crime video, so of course, just as a disclaimer, this is based on the research that I have been able to do, and I do always encourage everyone to do your own research as well. All of my sources will be linked in the description box below, but without further ado, today we're going to be talking about the Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982 that resulted in 7 deaths caused by Tylenol that was laced with cyanide. What happened would spark a fear so large that it spread just throughout the entire nation, along with throughout the entire world. I feel like everyone at that point in time was talking about what had happened in Chicago with these Tylenol capsules. And this was a time where Tylenol was one of the best-selling over-the-counter pain relievers, and within months of these murders, new industry regulations would come out that would change how we consume and purchase over-the-counter products, even to this day. So let's just get into it. At around 6:30 a.m. on September 29th, 1982, in Elk Grove Village, a 12-year-old girl by the name of Mary Kellerman wasn't feeling well. She woke up and she told her parents that she had a sore throat and a runny nose, and during this time, Tylenol was used for a multitude of different things. Mary was given one extra strength Tylenol, and at 7 a.m. her father Dennis heard a noise in the bathroom, so he went to go check on her. He said, quote, "I heard her go into the bathroom. I heard the door close. Then I heard something drop. I went to the bathroom door. I called, 'Mary, are you okay?' There was no answer. I called again, 'Mary, are you okay?' There was still no answer. So I opened the bathroom door and my little girl was on the floor unconscious. She was still in her pajamas," end quote. Mary was rushed to the hospital, and sadly, she would be pronounced dead at around 9:56 a.m. Initially, it was thought that she suffered from some kind of a stroke, but Mary was ordered to go to the medical examiner's office because of her age and the circumstances for them to perform an autopsy. Edmund Donahue was the deputy chief medical examiner for Cook County, and he would say that she was the first victim, but at the time, they didn't think it was anything that was too suspicious. Nick Pichos, who was the investigator with the county medical examiner's office, called Dennis Kellerman, who was Mary's father, and interviewed him over the phone. Then later, the police went to interview Dennis in person to make sure that the story did match up with what he had said earlier on the phone. At the time, they didn't know it was cyanide poisoning, but before we proceed, I wanted to present some information about cyanide that will be important as we go on with this case because of future events that happen. This will kind of give you a little bit of a background as to why certain details within this case were important. There are different types of cyanide, but potassium cyanide and sodium cyanide are identical when it comes to the effects. Symptoms occur within a few minutes of ingesting cyanide, and they include headache, dizziness, fast heart rate, shortness of breath, and vomiting. This may be followed by seizures, slow heart rate, low blood pressure, loss of consciousness, and cardiac arrest. If you are able to survive, you may develop heart, brain, and nerve damage. The reason being is because the tissues are not able to use the oxygen that is in the blood. It acts as an asphyxiant. Even though there is plenty of oxygen around you, it can't get into your blood. Once the person loses consciousness, brain death may follow. Death is caused by the brain losing oxygen, and this is called cerebral hypoxia. Exposure to cyanide poisoning is common once you've breathed in smoke from a house fire or if you work within the metal polishing field. Diagnosing cyanide poisoning can be difficult because measuring the levels in a person's blood can take some time. Historically, this was used in Jonestown, and if we bring it all the way back to 1942, Zyklon B was a hydrogen cyanide-based pesticide. It was used to murder prisoners of the concentration camps during the Holocaust within the gas chambers. There have been many other cases historically, but I will allow you to research that on your own time. Another piece of information about cyanide is that it has a bitter almond smell to it. But at the same time, not everyone is able to smell this. That comes down to genetics. There was one article that I read, and I'm not sure how accurate that is today because the study that they did is fairly old at this point. But in that study, they said that 1 in 10 people reportedly cannot pick up on the smell of cyanide. I will leave an article by the CDC linked below because it goes more in depth about cyanide. It also goes more in depth on what to do if you've come in contact with it, if you've had some kind of exposure to it. So of course I'll leave all of that linked below, but back to the case. So on that very same day that Mary Kellerman passed away, there was yet another death. Around 12 p.m. there was a man by the name of Adam Janus, who was a 27-year-old postal worker from Arlington Heights. Adam had taken a sick day because he felt as though he was starting to get a cold. That very same day, he picked up his children from preschool and stopped to buy some Tylenol. Once he got home, he ate some lunch, took 2 extra strength Tylenol capsules, and said he was going to go lie down. However, a couple of minutes had gone by when he came back into the kitchen and he just collapsed. Once Adam was brought to the ICU, they tried to resuscitate him, but his heart would not resuscitate. Dr. Thomas Kim, who was the medical director, said that it could have been a cardiac death, but he tried to explain to Adam's wife, Theresa, along with his parents and other family members that had shown up to the hospital, that he wasn't 100% sure if this was the case, and he wasn't 100% sure of what really caused this and what really happened. After this, the family decided to go back to Adam's house in Arlington Heights to mourn together and plan the funeral. At around 5 p.m., Adam Janus's brother Stanley, who was 25, and his 19-year-old sister-in-law Theresa, not to be confused with his wife Theresa, would be rushed to the hospital. They both took 2 extra strength Tylenols each from the same bottle that Adam had used just earlier in the day. Because Stanley took the Tylenol before Theresa, when paramedics arrived, they noticed that anything that happened to Stanley would then happen to Theresa shortly after. Dr. Kim was about to leave for the day when a nurse came in and told him that Adam's family was back in the hospital yet again. And Dr. Kim originally thought that it was because the family had come back in just to try to find out if there were any answers as to what happened to Adam. But then the nurse told him that no, that's not why they're here. Adam's brother and sister-in-law are here because they're performing CPR on them, so they're not here for that reason. Sadly, Stanley passed away that night, and Theresa would pass away just a few days later. Helen Jensen, who was a nurse, received a call in the middle of dinner from Chuck Kramer, who was from the Arlington Heights Fire Department, and he told her that he suspected something wasn't right. It didn't make sense that Adam would be rushed to the hospital, and then 2 more people were brought in from the same household just several hours later. Chuck Kramer told Nurse Jensen that they wanted a public health official there and that she was the only one that he knew that could help. She immediately dropped everything that she was doing and she went to the hospital. Nurse Jensen saw Adam's wife Theresa at the hospital, and she asked her a lot of questions to see if maybe something would connect these tragic events to one another. Investigator PHO3NIX also came to the hospital to ask some questions, and no one seemed to know what could have caused the deaths. That's when he decided that they would go to the house and just investigate. At around 8 p.m., PHO3NIX and Helen Jensen, along with some officers, showed up at Adam's house. They couldn't find anything, but investigator PHO3NIX went into the basement to find that there had been signs of metalworking, and as I said earlier, this is something that can cause exposure to cyanide. Amongst all of the over-the-counter and prescription medication that they had in the home, Helen somehow stumbled upon the Tylenol bottle, and when she took a look at it, she noticed that there were 6 capsules missing. She quickly did the math and figured out that if each adult took 2 pills each, then 3 adults, it kind of makes sense that they all took the Tylenol from the same exact bottle. There was no protective seal on the bottle, but the cotton was still in the bottle. So Helen decided that she was going to take this bottle just in case if it led to something or if it provided some kind of clues for them to be able to figure out what happened with all 3 of these people, or maybe if they were exposed to something. Once they got back to the hospital, investigator PHO3NIX and another officer went into a room. They started going over all of the evidence that they collected from the home. That's when Helen walked into the room. She put the bottle of Tylenol down on the table and she said, quote, "This is the cause," end quote. They didn't believe her. She got frustrated, rightfully so, to the point where she even stomped her feet to try to get them to listen to her, but they didn't yet. They ended up listening to her a little bit later. But PHO3NIX remembered that they had taken the Tylenol bottle from Mary Kellerman's home just earlier that day. That's when he asked someone to bring it to him, and once he received it, he noticed that the bottle from both homes of Mary and Adam had the same lot numbers. During all of this, Dr. Kim was trying so hard to be able to figure out what was wrong, and he was starting to get really frustrated that he didn't have answers for anybody, and the only thing that he was able to come up with was, could this be a possible cyanide poisoning? However, he couldn't figure out where the exposure to the cyanide could have come from, but once PHO3NIX saw that the lot numbers matched, he called Donahue and said that the only common denominator so far was the Tylenol bottles that had matching lot numbers. That's when Donahue told him to open the bottle and smell it. PHO3NIX was lucky enough to have the gene to be able to smell cyanide. He told Donahue that both bottles smell like almonds. On Thursday, September 30th, Dr. Kim was able to get the lab results back from the Tylenol bottles, and they in fact contained more than a lethal dose of cyanide in them. Even though they had finally found the root cause, over the next few days, 3 more people died. Those 3 people included 31-year-old Mary McFarland had complained of having a headache, so she decided to take some Tylenol. Her brother Jack said that after she had taken the Tylenol, she collapsed. At 3:15 a.m. on September 30th, 1982, Mary had been pronounced dead. However, Mary's bottle had a different lot number from Mary Kellerman's and Adam Janus's bottles, which meant it was from a different manufacturing location. So this is where they started to think Johnson & Johnson had nothing to do with it, and that this was someone tampering with the over-the-counter medication. 27-year-old Mary Reiner had given birth to her 4th child about a week prior, and she was not feeling well, so she decided to take some Tylenol. She collapsed shortly after. Her husband, Ed Reiner, came home immediately, and they rushed Mary to the hospital, but sadly she did not survive and was pronounced dead at 9:30 a.m. on September 30th. With Mary's bottle of Tylenol, it had allegedly come from the hospital, not from a retail location, and her bottle was that of a regular Tylenol with some extra strength Tylenol capsules mixed into it. 35-year-old Paula Prince was a flight attendant for United Airlines, and she had just landed in O'Hare Airport after traveling from Las Vegas. She stopped at a Walgreens to pick up some Tylenol because she had a headache. Police would eventually be called to her residence in order to do a wellness check on her, and at 5 p.m. on October 1st, police would find Paula's body in her apartment with an open bottle of Tylenol sitting on her vanity. The difference with her Tylenol bottle is only 1 capsule had cyanide in it, and the lot number didn't match the other lot numbers. So how did this happen? On the morning of September 30th of 1982, an attorney from Johnson & Johnson, which is the parent company of the manufacturer of Tylenol, and that manufacturer is McNeil Consumer Products, showed up to find out about cyanide that had been put in the Tylenol capsules. Once they were notified that the Tylenol is what was causing these deaths, they immediately issued a mass warning and recalled more than 31 million bottles of Tylenol, along with stopping production.
Extra strength Tylenol capsules laced with a cyanide are linked with 5 deaths in Chicago, and that number might be changed to 6. Some of the bottles from the affected shipment have been found in Florida. Eckerd Drugstores in Clearwater reports that they pulled them off the shelf within hours of hearing about the potentially deadly pills. But as Chris Abel reports, none have been found in Central Florida.
Poison Control, can I help you?
For nearly 1 solid hour, nurses at the Orlando Regional Medical Center comforted fears of local residents. Callers had heard news that cyanide-contaminated Tylenol capsules had killed 6 people in Chicago. Authorities suspect sabotage. Here, nurses report no cyanide cases.
We are letting know what the number is, the lot number, and giving them some symptoms and just basically reassurance.
Across the Orlando area, stores checked their extra-strength Tylenol stock. Many stores removed it, like stores in 31 other states. But here, some stores left the product, pending further word from their corporate headquarters.
This bottle of Tylenol came from a box with a manufacturer's code that was different than the code reportedly contaminated. Upon checking, Eyewitness News discovered that no store in the Orlando area carried the contaminated bottles.
None of the merchandise we had in our stores matched the manufacturer code number that was supposed to be contaminated.
So why'd you pull it off the shelf?
Just to be on the safe side until we can find more information out on it.
The Tylenol manufacturer has recalled 93,000 bottles of the suspect lot. They were manufactured in August. Florida did receive some of those bottles. Medical authorities in Chicago are recommending that no one take the Tylenol capsule until authorities obtain more information.
When they recalled the bottles, they found that there were other bottles that were in circulation that contained poisonous capsules within the Chicago area. Thankfully, no one had consumed those and they were now off the shelves. They were able to find a total of 8 bottles that contained cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. However, there could have possibly been more because not everybody sent their Tylenol capsules or their bottles back to the company. Some of them may have just thrown them out or whatever the case may be. So there may have been more bottles. It's just there were only 8 reported bottles. McNeil Consumer Products and Johnson & Johnson did offer consumers replacement capsules, but if that was me, I wouldn't have wanted replacement capsules, at least not that soon. Maybe it's just my opinion, but I just, no thank you. There was a reward for any information that would lead to the person or people who were responsible for these murders, and investigators and the manufacturer were having trouble trying to pinpoint who did this and how could this happen. This was mainly because Johnson & Johnson was saying that this could not have happened during production, but that these bottles were laced with cyanide after they left the factory. This led some to theorize that maybe there was someone who was going to these different retail locations and taking these bottles off the shelves, lacing them with cyanide, and then putting them back on the shelf. But remember how I talked about the one bottle was allegedly from the hospital, it wasn't from a retail location. And what would be the reason for this? What would be the motive? Is there a serial killer on the loose, or is this someone who just wants to have control and power and create chaos? Well, on October 4th of 1982, Mayor Byrne had the Chicago City Council pass an ordinance that over-the-counter drugs had to have tamper-proof packaging in order to be sold in stores. At one point, Detective Hogberg had said that they spoke to some people who had been terminated by Johnson & Johnson. They thought that maybe an ex-employee could have been capable of doing something like this because they were a disgruntled employee. Maybe they were trying to get back at the company or sabotage it. He found that Johnson & Johnson had a problem with talcum powder. There was a green substance growing on the talcum powder, and the chemist said it was some kind of mold that grows in damp oak. Well, within the talc mine, they had oak pallets, and on that very same team of chemists, there was a man who was terminated. However, he was rolled out. The FBI ended up bringing in John Douglas. Yes, the infamous John Douglas, to come up with a profile for the suspect. John Douglas did think that this could have been someone who just wanted to spark chaos. There was no motive, no specific victim. He thought this might be a man who had a lot of failures in his life, along with having some complaints against him. This possible suspect would have a hard time keeping a job, along with having a psychiatric record, and that at the time of the Chicago Tylenol murders, he would have gone through some kind of triggering, stressful situation that would have caused him to just do all of this. There was a suspect by the name of James Lewis, and this is one that is commonly associated with this case. The reason being is because on October 6th of 1982, He sent a ransom letter to Johnson & Johnson saying that he would stop poisoning people if he received $1 million. The letter reads, "Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves. And since the cyanide is in the gelatin, it is easier to get buyers to swallow the bitter pill. Another beauty is that the cyanide operates quickly. It takes so very little, and there will be no time to take countermeasures. If you don't mind the publicity of these little capsules, then do nothing. So far, I have spent less than $50, and it takes me less than 10 minutes per bottle. If you want to stop the killing, then wire $1 million to bank account number 84-49-597 at Continental Illinois Bank, Chicago, Illinois. Don't attempt to involve the FBI or local Chicago authorities with this letter. A couple of phone calls by me will undo anything you can possibly do." However, the bank account that was listed in that letter traced back to someone by the name of Frederick Miller McKahee. So why would someone who allegedly committed a crime, and a crime this heinous, write an extortion letter and then have a link back to him by providing his own bank account number? Why? That doesn't make any sense. So the FBI went to Frederick and they questioned him. Of course, he denied having any involvement, and when they showed him the letter, they asked him if he knew of anyone who could have possibly been trying to set him up. That's when he spoke of the names Bob and Nancy Richardson. But what the FBI would come to find out is that Bob and Nancy Richardson were actually James and Leanne Lewis. James Lewis didn't have the best track record. James chased his mother with an axe at age 19, and in 1966 was committed to a psychiatric facility where he would be later diagnosed with catatonic schizophrenia. James later said that this was all an act that he put on so that he wouldn't get drafted for the war. In 1978, he was arrested for the murder of Raymond West, who was his neighbor at the time. Because they didn't read James his Miranda rights, all of the evidence that they found that was in James's possession was inadmissible, which meant that he was released. In 1981, investigators were able to find evidence of credit card fraud that linked back to James Lewis, but by the time that they went to his residence to take him into custody, James and Leanne had already fled to Chicago. Once they got to Chicago, Leanne had found a job working for Frederick McKahee. Of course, that's how they were able to get that bank account information. They were trying to allegedly set up Frederick McKahee, or at least put him under the radar of the FBI officials, whatever, because they believed, James and Leanne believed, that there was some kind of shady business going on. And that started when Frederick shut down his business, and all of the last paychecks that went out to the employees, they all bounced. So, of course, James and Leanne got really loud about this, along with everybody else. They all kind of joined together. They tried to sue Frederick, which nothing came of this. But James and Leanne decided to move to New York. And once police and federal investigators were able to get fingerprints off of the letter, they finally found out that James Lewis lived in New York with his wife and had no ties to what happened in Chicago. There were still some who did believe that he has something to do with it. They just couldn't link him to the crime. There was no evidence of him being associated with the crime. James Lewis would eventually be charged with extortion and sentenced to 20 years in prison, however, was released in 1995 after serving 13 years. By October 25th, they still had not been able to find out who the culprit was. Their task force went from 115 investigators all the way down to 40. Something that is worth mentioning also is how many complaints there were with Tylenol for about 3 years prior, and that was of having foreign objects in the bottles. Some of them included things like fingernails, which is really disgusting, but this wasn't known until later when the families of the victims decided to sue the company. There have been plenty of theories since, and people have been trying to figure this out just to find out who was responsible for these murders. And after the 25th anniversary of this unsolved case, police had received tips, which in turn caused them to look over the evidence yet again. This caused them to search the home of James Lewis in 2009, where they also retrieved a sample of his DNA for analysis, but they still came up with nothing that would link James Lewis to this just horrible, horrible tragedy. The FBI requested to get DNA samples from Ted Kaczynski, who is also known as a Unabomber, who had targeted the same area a few years earlier. Ted denied having any involvement with what happened. Another suspect was Roger Arnold. He had been at a bar where he was talking about the poisonings when the bar owner called the police, told them about this guy who's just kind of openly talking about this. So when police showed up at his home and they did a search, they found that he had almost like his own lab. There was potassium carbonate in powder form that was found along with unlicensed guns. Roger was further investigated by the police and was later cleared of the murders. Because of the stress of the investigation, Roger suffered a nervous breakdown and ended up blaming the bar owner by the name of Marty Sinclair, who had been the one who called the police to begin with. Roger went to the bar and was planning on shooting Marty Sinclair. However, he thought that John Stanisha was Marty. He accidentally shot and killed John. Roger Arnold was sentenced to serve 30 years for the murder, but only served 15 and then died in 2008. Some have speculated and said that this could have been an alleged competitor that was trying to bring Tylenol down. Others have said that they think it might be a cover-up, and that the alleged cover-up, and that the poisoning happened on the production side. The case remains unsolved to this day. I'm hoping that one day we can find out who was behind all of this. But unfortunately, there were copycat murders. There's two that I wanted to mention, and that is Stella Nickel and Joseph Melling. So Stella lived in Seattle. She filled Excedrin capsules with cyanide. She targeted her husband Bruce Nichols so that she could receive his insurance money. However, she had also poisoned 40-year-old Susan Snow and her husband, but the husband did survive this poisoning. In 1988, Stella was sentenced to 90 years in prison, and this was the first prison sentence under the federal product tampering laws that were put into place after the Chicago Tylenol murders, which we will go over that in a little bit. Another copycat was Joseph Melling. He put cyanide in Sudafed in order to poison his wife to collect insurance money as well. But he ended up murdering 2 other people. In April of 1993, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. There were other people that had something to say about what had happened in Chicago in 1982, one of them being the superintendent, and he said that in his opinion, this was an initial homicide and that the murderer knew the victim, but to cover it up so that it didn't seem like an isolated incident, the murderer contaminated other Tylenol bottles to make it look like it was random. Then firefighter Richard Keyworth had a gut feeling that it was a way to show the United States how much control someone can have. That this person can shut down an entire economy and control the world, which essentially, if their goal was to create chaos and to have control, to have this be so widespread, in that sense, they did succeed, because this was everywhere. This was worldwide. So what ended up happening after all of this? Were there new laws? Were there new regulations? Johnson & Johnson came up with a new way of protecting the consumer. This is when they worked with the FDA and created tamper-proof packaging. If you open an over-the-counter drug now, that protected foil seal is an industry standard because of what happened in 1982. That was thanks to the FDA in 1989, making it a federal guideline for manufacturers to make these products tamper-proof. Because it was easy to tamper with the capsules, Tylenol came out with a new type of pill, which was called the caplet. This was a tablet coated with a gelatin. This would make it harder for someone to lace the medication. Even with what happened in 1982, and after investing more than $100 million into all of these changes, within a year, Tylenol sales went back to normal. They were the favorite over-the-counter pain reliever yet again. In 1983, the United States Congress passed a bill called the Tylenol Bill. This bill made it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. This entire tragedy is still talked about today, especially in business schools, because of how Tylenol handled the situation on the business side, how they were able to get back on their feet as a brand. That wasn't the end of Tylenol. So what are your thoughts on this case? Do you have any theories? Do you think that we'll ever find out who the culprit is? Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know if this will ever be solved, because some people do think that there was some kind of conspiracy of a cover-up and stuff like that, which a lot of the theories that I was reading online, I mean, a lot of them, it could be or it couldn't be. I'm hoping that we do, and I'm hoping that the families end up finding out what happened to their loved ones and who was behind all of this, because it is a very sad situation. I do hope that all of the victims are resting in peace. I truly hope that their families have been able to just be able to cope with everything. Let me know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are below, and I will see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye!